An ongoing endeavor that WITSA has embraced to evangelize about the goods of innovation and technology. Now we presented more about AI. There's been, of course, great discussions all over the world about, the scares and the flares about AI. And I'm glad, I was unable to go over the publication about the 40 myths, but what we were able to harness over the review, it really speaks to what WITSA has been standing for in propagating that innovation never have a straitjacket on. It needs to fulfill the promise and fulfill the promise of including everyone. And fulfilling the promise is something that is very dear to WITSA, especially in the digital age. So with that, I am very glad to be here. I'm going to be a very curious observer, and I'll pass it on to you, my friend Anders.
Thank you very much, Robert. So just very briefly, I am Vice President for Global Public Policy at WITSA. And as Robert mentioned, this is a series of webinars that we are doing on the viewpoint of WITSA. So very quickly, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the WITSA AI policy. We published in last fall a benchmark paper for all of our members with input from all of our association in 80 countries around the world, as well as from input from some of our trusted industry partners and colleagues. So also want to thank Robert for heading up our AI task force. As we went through the AI paper in some detail during previous webinars, I'm just going to briefly show some of the principles here, the key principles. So the paper is available on our website for those who want to take a quicker look. So in essence, whether the promise of AI will deliver on its potential really depends on how well businesses, AI developers, governments, and other stakeholders manage their perceived risks while fostering a regulatory environment that encourages innovation, best practices, voluntary standards, and international collaboration. The recent acceleration of both the power and the visibility of AI systems and growing awareness of their abilities and defects have raised fears that technology is now expanding so quickly that it cannot be safely controlled. But as our paper explains, exaggerated and misleading concerns about AI tools' potential to cause harm has sometimes crowded out the reasonable discussions on the technology, leading to an unfortunate tech panic. This is a term that I know people at ITIF are very familiar with. Anyways, the fear that machines will steal jobs is centuries old, but new technology generally creates new jobs that will replace the ones that have been lost. Machines tend to be able to perform some of the tasks, not others, increasing the demand for people who can do the jobs that machines cannot. The degree of existential risk posed by the AI is hotly debated, but all involve a huge amount of guesswork and a leap of today's technology. Even experts sometimes overstate the risks in their own areas. Imposing heavy regulation is manifestly an overreaction. When regulation is warranted, it is more for near-term impacts than saving humanity from extinction. As we all know, existing AI systems raise a real concern about bias, privacy, intellectual property rights. And as the technology continues to advance, other problems could still become apparent. The key is to balance the promise of AI with a sound judgment of the actual risks and to be ready to adapt accordingly, recognizing and enforcing existing rules capable of tackling the harms that may arise from AI deployment before considering any new AI-specific legislation. And as the panic over new AI innovations, such as generative AI, enters its most volatile stage, policymakers should recognize the predictable cycle we are in and proceed cautiously regarding any regulatory effort so as not to harm AI innovation. So on to today's topic, debunking tech myths about privacy, jobs, AI, and today's innovation economy. Technologies and tech companies are routinely accused of creating many societal problems. We are excited for today's fireside chat to have the authors of the brand new must-read book entitled Technology, Fears and Scapegoats, 40 Myths About Privacy, Jobs, AI, and Today's Innovation Economy by Dr. Robert Atkinson, President and founder of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and David Moschella, who is a non-resident senior fellow at ITIF. So just a brief background here. The ITIF is recognized as the world's top think tank for science and technology policy. And Dr. Atkinson leads a prolific team of policy analysts and fellows that are successfully shaping the debate and setting the agenda for a host of critical issues at the intersection of technological innovation and public policy. Dr. Atkinson is an international recognized scholar and widely published author whom the New Republic has named one of the 3 most important thinkers about innovation. And the Washingtonian magazine has called him a tech titan. Government Technology magazine has judged him one of the top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers of information technology. And the Wharton Business School has given the Wharton Infosys Business Transformation Award. A sought-after speaker and a valued advisor to policymakers around the world, Atkinson's books include Technology, Fears and Scapegoats, 40 Myths About Privacy, AI, and Today's Innovation Economy, which is the topic of today. He has also published Big is Beautiful, Debunking the Mythology of Small Business, Innovation Economics, The Race for Global Advantage, Supply Side Follies, The Conservative Economics Fails, Liberal Economics Falters, and The Innovation Economics is the Answer. And finally, The Past and Future of America's Economy, Long Ways of Innovation that Powers Cycles of Growth. He has also conducted groundbreaking research projects and authored hundreds of articles and reports on technology and innovation-related topics, ranging from tax policy to advancing manufacturing, productivity, and global competitiveness. He has testified before the U.S. Congress more than 30 times. David Moschella is a non-resident fellow at ITIF, as we mentioned previously. Previously he was a research fellow at the Leading Edge Forum, where he explored global business impact of digital technologies, with particular focus on disruptive business models, industry restructuring, and machine intelligence. For more than a decade before LEF, David was in charge of worldwide research at IDC, the largest market analysis firm in the information technology industry, responsible for the company's global technology industry forecasts and insights. A well-known international speaker, writer, and thought leader, David's books include Seeing Digital, a visual guide to the industries, organizations, and careers of the 2020s, Customer-Driven IT, and Waves of Power. He has lectured and consulted on digital trends and strategies in more than 30 countries, working with leading customers and suppliers alike. In this fireside chat, Dr. Mike Nelson, Senior Fellow of Technology and International Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, will ask pertinent questions to Dr. Atkinson and David Moschella about their rebuttal of the widespread myths about big tech, big data, AI, privacy, trust polarization, automation, and similar fears, while exposing the scapegoating behind them. This webinar will provide a balanced analysis of the technology's impact on society and the overwhelmingly positive impact, and will also serve as a call to tech insiders, policymakers, and the general public to restore the West's faith in technological progress. As I mentioned, Mike is a senior fellow at the Carnegie's Endowment for Technology and International Affairs program, which works with policymakers and others to harness the potential of emerging technologies. His research focuses on internet governance, technology standards, innovation, and data policy, including machine learning. He works closely at Carnegie India, the Asia program, and colleagues in Europe and Israel. Prior to joining Carnegie, he started the Global Public Policy Office of Cloudflare, a startup that has provided the performance and security of more than 10 million websites around the world. Nelson is also served as a principal technology policy strategist in Microsoft's Technology Policy Group. And before that, he was senior technology and telecom analyst at Bloomberg Government. In addition, Nelson taught courses and doing research on the future of the internet, cyber policy, tech policy, innovation policy, in e-government in the communication, culture, and tech program at Georgetown University. For almost 10 years, Nelson was a director of internet technology and strategy at IBM, where he managed a team that helped define and implement IBM's next generation internet strategy. He has served as chairman of the Information Communication and Computing section at the AAA.
Anders, I'm gonna interrupt you.
Yeah.
I should have given you the Twitter version of that.
Yeah.
We're here to listen to Dave and to Bob and to Rob. So why don't I just get started and we can. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no problem.
What my bio makes very clear is that I've been doing this for a long time, and I should say I've been learning a great deal from both Rob and Dave over that time.
All right.
But let me get started, and let me start by thanking you, Anders, for setting this all up and making sure that I don't have to introduce the two panelists. But I think people are here to listen to them, and I'm here to just get the conversation started. And this is designed to be an informal conversation. It is being recorded so that others can watch it later. But the key is that we give you an overview of what's happening in this book, why it was written, and then most importantly, focus on how you might be able to use it to change the minds of political leaders, journalists, CEOs, and make for a better environment for new technologies. The most important part of this will be the Q&A, and we have lots of time for that. So be thinking of questions that you want to ask Dave or Rob. So let me start with a couple generic questions about what you're trying to do here. What's the agenda? And I'm gonna start with the biggest question, which is, of the 40 myths that you've laid out, which one or two do you think are the most problematic, causing the most harm, and the ones that we need to focus the most attention on? And I'll let you decide which ones you want to go. Which one of you wants to start with that question?
David, why don't you go first?
Okay. It's an interesting question because, in our view, quite a lot of them have a lot of harm implicit in them. But certainly today, all of the myths about AI put that front and center, that, computer technologists have been working on various forms of artificial intelligence since the very first thoughts of building a computer back in the 40s and 50s. And here we are 75 years later, and some of those dreams are actually being reached. And all of a sudden, the whole world says, ooh, do we really want to do that? And if you look at the debate and discussions about AI, I would say 80 to 90% of what you hear and read are about the potential problems and the shackles and concerns and regulations and things we might need to do to slow it down, and all the harms that it might cause. When in the old days, discussions of new technologies would have been precisely the opposite, that 80 to 90% of the discussion would be about, wow, what can you do with this thing in terms of translations and customer service and advanced search and software development and images and just about anything else that you can imagine. That this fantastic invention, that interesting uses aside, is absolutely essential for the future competitiveness of America, is being branded as essentially being more bad than good. And so that probably is the most pressing. And I could add more to that, but maybe throw it back to Rob if you want to build on that one, or add another one and go back and forth a bit.
Yeah. I mean, really the uber myth that we didn't have as a myth is that technology is more problematic than beneficial, as David said. You know, if you make a statement, which I firmly believe, that virtually all technologies are good, you get laughed at, you get looked like clearly you're an idiot, or what's worse, you're Mark Andreessen. When you saw what happened to him when he wrote that techno-optimist manifesto, he was ridiculed, he was attacked. Very, very strange. So if I had to pick two, I would pick number 4, which David wrote, which is technology is driving today's societal distrust. So, you know, look, we're all, you know, it doesn't matter where you are. I suppose maybe, I don't know, maybe if you're in like, I don't know, like some island off of Africa or something, maybe things are pretty calm and cool and happy, but pretty much everywhere else, a lot of, you know, disruption and discord, and people are trying to come up with an answer. Hey, what's caused all this? And rather than look at what are the real causes, which are you know, serious problems in the world, the failure of elites on so many different functions and areas, they're going to blame technology. So that's number 1. Number 2, which sounds a little strange, but I actually think it's the second most important, is number 22. Productivity gains no longer benefit workers. Now, I put that up there because once you stop believing that, which is a myth, and it has been, when you really look at it and you look at the evidence in an objective way, you find out that it's just total BS, that's a total myth, that productivity has continued to benefit workers at all scale of the income scale. And but if you say that's not true, then you really take away a big reason to support technological innovation, because the whole point of it all along was it makes us better off. And if it's only making the 1% better off, then yeah, then we can and probably should say there's some real problems with it. But if it's benefiting everybody, as we argue it is, then that makes it a lot harder to demonize this technology. So I put that one as pretty high up there.
I would certainly agree with you on that one. The other one, of course, that you put the very first was the fact that technology is causing the world to change more rapidly than ever before. And I think a lot of us want to find a scapegoat for all the craziness around us. And whether it's Iran or Putin invading Russia or children addicted to their phones, we're looking for things that might explain why we don't like the way the world is going. And I'd like to explore a little bit more how you rebut the argument that things are out of control, that technology is just escaping our efforts to guide it and make sure it doesn't cause more harm than good.
And you know, like the funny thing about that is it's so easy that it's so manifestly not true that technology is not changing the world as never before. And all you have to do is look back at history. That, you know, the computer industry is roughly 60 years old, since the early 60s or so. And so let's look at those 60 years versus the 60 years that were before them. And in those 60 years, we saw electricity, we saw lighting, we saw cars and planes and rockets, and we saw clean hot water, we saw heat and air conditioning and washers and dryers and telephones and radios and TVs. And we saw all of these things that for most people are actually still today far more important to their lives, and certainly change the way people live more than computers and software and email and e-commerce and maps and smartphones and these things. So, you know, just in terms of their impact, they're you know, I would make the case for anybody who lives in a hot climate probably wouldn't trade their air conditioners for all of what technology brings. So, you know, we've been through much more profound changes in the use of technology to improve lives. getting all of those technologies I mentioned to basically everybody in the developed world. And so, maybe the next 60 years might be different, but the 60 we've just been through, it just doesn't really compare. And, it's sort of human nature for people to think that their own times are special and that we're going through more turbulent things than people in the past. And in some ways, that's fine. And in America, it's sort of, we see the analogy that every single election is presented as the most important election of our lifetime because people put more weight on their current circumstances. And in some ways, that's okay, but it does tend to increase fear and anxieties about the future because if things are changing faster than ever before, the fact that previous changes have been overwhelmingly beneficial doesn't really matter as much as you convince yourself that you're in a different time now and the lessons of the past may not be relevant. But I think if you just look at it objectively, that you can see that, the first wave, those first 60 years, they're all about the physical world, housing, food, shelter, comfort. And the physical world still is more important than the cyber world. That may change, but actually, I don't think it will change. And if you look at the next wave of changes, when you start looking at green energy and sustainable foods, and you look at the things going on in Ukraine, the physical world is still sort of dominant. And the ability of the cyber world to replace that is not certain at all.
So let me ask Rob another generic question that pertains to the entire book. Clearly, there's a lot of people that should read this: journalists, politicians, corporate strategy, and people and CEOs. I mean, we were talking before the show started about getting this book on the curriculum in universities in a whole range of different parts of the university, from business schools to tech programs. So, Robbie, if you had your wish, which of the audiences would really embrace this and try to understand all 40 myths?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me which audience do I think it's most important to get it.
Well, that's the next question, and then the third question is which group do you think is the hardest to deprogram?
See, I basically most people, firstly, the people who believe these myths, they're unprogrammable. Okay, they're living down in Guyana. You can't deprogram them. What you can, but the real sort of what's at stake here is the average person who hears things like, "Oh yeah, I think AI is biased. That's what everybody says," or "Yeah, my data is worth a lot. People tell me that all the time." Yeah, those people are just sort of picking up what the activists and the media enablers are saying, and internet chatter. And those people, if they are presented with a compelling argument that's simple, and most of these chapters are pretty short and straightforward, I think they can change their minds. The policy-making audience, Mike, as you know, is a lot harder because they don't read many books, number one. But number two, they're drinking from a fire hose, and there's so much coming at them, and our book is just one thing coming at them, and there'll be, for every one book of this, there's 50 books on the other side, easily. And so that was my other point about who I'll answer my own question, which is, who do I care most about reading this? And that's corporate tech leaders, because they're the ones who have abandoned the cause. They're the ones who've let this happen. They're the ones, as David points out, they're the ones who haven't fought back. They're the ones who've just gone about running their companies and not fighting this fight. And there's no way to win this fight unless they get in the battle, start getting on the battlefield. They kind of put their head down and hope, geez, I'm running my company, maybe this nonsense will go away. Or even more likely, they say, how could anybody in their right mind believe this crazy stuff? So they don't take it seriously. So I really think that's who needs to read the book.
Well, I'm going to say something controversial, and I'm not trying to feed conspiracy theories, but there's a small group of corporate players who find these myths very useful. And you highlight some of the companies that have used these myths to save their old business model from new technology and new business models. I think that may be the hardest. I mean, and some of them have very large advertising and lobbying budgets. When I was on Capitol Hill, I used to joke that my bosses, the senators, were overwhelmed by the fire hose of information you mentioned. Every day they were making 50 different decisions, ranging from who to hire for their office to what should the deficit be. And the fact that a third of what they got was pretty much true, a third was half true, and a third was just total fantasy. Just made up factoids that were designed to sway them in a direction that somebody, not just corporations, sometimes it's advocacy groups, sometimes it's constituents who hear the wrong factoid and share it. So I don't know if we're going to reform the legislative process, but I am hoping that we can turn these little chapters into even shorter little tweets and blurbs and bumper stickers. I've been talking about the need for those 7 magic words that define an issue. And in this case, if we can find 7 magic words that undo or counter the myths, then we've got our path towards fighting the phoniness.
And Mike, in many ways, that's what we tried to do in the title of each chapter, which is basically 8, 6, 7, 8, 10 words stating as clearly as we can that actually the internet increases the average citizen's privacy, and it really is not the main source of misinformation and all of those things. And I just want to sort of reinforce what Rob said about engaging the CEOs, because where it really is shown to me is if you watch any of the sort of hearings in Washington and Congress, whatever, on privacy or AI or big data or any of these things, basically the CEOs go in there and they take a beating of people accusing them of killing children and abusing privacy and just about anything they can, ruining elections. They just get accused of basically everything. And the response of the CEOs is basically to say, well, we can do better. And yeah, we've made some mistakes. And they never really challenge the core charges. And you can sort of see why they don't, because they don't want to argue with people who regulate them. But they basically, they cede so much ground that they basically yield and act like, oh yeah, all these accusations are mostly true and we just need to deal with it. And so when Rob says they got to speak up more, that's part of it. But it's also something like, this organization, when you're all in the business of promoting this industry's innovation and trying to drive it forward, and any organization like that, just like ITIF or just like the companies, has an interest in getting a more positive view out there. And as Rob said, no one book is going to change that, but if you give enough organizations and enough people enough ammunition, they can maybe get those points out there and have a chance to have it, some presence of because today it's overwhelmingly the other mindset.
Yeah, I have a list of 52 things I learned in Washington. And one of them is never get on the wrong side of a powerful bumper sticker, even if it's 100% wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so you've countered the bumper stickers by saying, the internet or social media is not the main source of disinformation, but you really have to have a counter explanation. So for that one, you have to say, what is the major source of misinformation? Another one of my favorite myths, and ones that I've cited in many speeches, is that data is the new oil. And this is such a powerful myth that it was on the cover of The Economist magazine 5 years ago. And I hear it from telecom ministers around the world. I hear it from journalists, and they sort of start with that. And you don't counter that by saying data is not the new oil. You counter by saying data is, you have to find your own powerful analogy. So for both of those, Rob or Dave, what would be the analogy, and who is spreading the disinformation if it's not Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, those are both ones I can gather. You want to go with either of those first, Rob? Because those are two chapters I mostly did.
Why don't you go with the do them both? But I mean, the media one is just.
I'd like to start with the misinformation one because I think
that's just anybody who can say that after the Hunter Biden laptop thing, that says social media was spreading the mis. I mean, give me a break. It was 100% the opposite.
Yeah, because your starting point is what is all this great misinformation that's on the internet? And if you ask people, and this is very much from an American point of view, but what are the things that people actually point to? They say, well, on the internet you can read that that 9/11 was an inside job, or that the QAnon thing about Pizza Huts being used for child abuse, or that the COVID vaccines were injecting chips into people's arms. And you see all these things, but these are all such fringe ideas but they get repeated over and over again, like this is the real misinformation that's out there. But as Rob said, the real misinformation out there is consistently from either our own government or our media. There were not weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The Steele dossier was not highly credible from British intelligence. The Hunter Biden laptop was not Russian disinformation. The Wuhan lab leak theory was not some racist conspiratorial fantasy. You can go, Russia didn't put bounties on American soldiers in Afghanistan. Ivermectin is not a horse dewormer. It's actually the people who developed it won the Nobel Prize in medicine because it's one of the most important medicines in the world today. And you can go on and on of stories that have been widespread, not fringe ideas, but on the front pages of TV, news, whatever, that are all just completely wrong. So, when people say, what's the real source of misinformation? Well, it's the mainstream media, it's politicians pushing their agendas, it's whatever. But the examples they come up on the internet world are just very fringe. They make a great deal about Russian bots and propaganda, but those activities are such a tiny fraction of the content that's on the internet that how anyone can see those as the primary sources of information is just sort of baffling. And I'll sort of stop on that when we can do the data you want.
If I can just pile on, there's a mega myth that's one level higher that you really didn't address, and that is that misinformation is bad. Total confusion and discombobulation is worse. And that's really what people are after. The countries that are practicing cognitive warfare and trying to distort our view of reality don't want to tell us that there's one version of reality, their version of reality. They want to give us 17 different versions so that we just throw up our hands and, we don't know which kind of misinformation to believe. We just know that we can't believe anything.
But I think
that's not social media. That, as you say, that's.
That point reinforces what I'm saying, that most deliberately wrong things are coming from, official sources.
Yep.
And the stuff on the internet tends to be just stuff that's wrong, which to me is a lesser offense.
So Rob, let's figure out what the counter meme is. What is data supposed to be compared to? I have heard it compared to oil, to water, to air, to plutonium, which is the most interesting. Put too much together, it blows up in a very bad way. I've even heard it compared to avocados. It's only ripe for a little while, and then you have to throw it away. And then you also have a myth that data is not gold. You make the point that it's not the most valuable part of our digital infrastructure. So what is it? If we have 7 words to convince somebody that data should be compared to blank, what is blank?
I don't know the answer to that one. I'm going to let David do that.
Yeah, I'll take a couple shots at it. And I agree with the rejection of the oil as we wrote about, but I would give you 2. I would say that data is probably most like the printing press because it's just a profound way of distributing and accessing information. And it's also just in that information space. So I think that is a far more accurate analogy than oil and the physical world and all the things that come with that. And so I think that's a good historical one. But right now, I would give you a better, I think a more relevant analogy. And that is that data, and particularly data/technology, is like the space race. That this is simply who is going to win in making the advanced technologies of the future. And if you go back to the 60s and 70s when America won the space race, it basically carried a powerful message as to which society was most prestigious, most competent, most capable. And the race in technology, to me, is directly analogous to that today between the US and China. Who's going to win that race?
So let me perfect your printing press analogy. I would say that data is like the printed page, which the printing press makes available, but the fact that the printed page, like data, can be spread, people can copy it. I mean, that would, I think, help a lot of people understand it better.
It was just as big a deal as the stuff.
Yeah. Oh, bigger. I mean, it caused the 30 Years' War and probably caused the Reformation. Yeah. So it kind of rewrote history. But I'm really partial to data is the new water, because water is like data. It flows. It can be used and reused. It can be in many formats, from ice to water to clouds. But the best reason it's a good analogy is most of the planet's water is either in the deep ocean, very hard to get to, or it's frozen in the ice sheets. And so we have to be very creative to liberate all that water and or data if we're going to get the full benefit. So let me move into regulation a little bit and touch on one of the myths that I know Rob is very fond of and has spent much of the last 20 years talking about, and that is the myth that the European Union should be our model for digital regulation or tech regulation of any type. So is it the Brussels effect or the Brussels defect, Rob?
No, so there's a couple of things going on there. One is the Europeans, if you go back and you read a book by The American Challenge by Jean-Jacques Sebre, I want to say, back in 65, 66. He was a Frenchman. He saw the rise of IBM and these amazing American corporations, particularly in computing and electronics, and he raised the alarm that Europe was falling behind. And reality was Europe was falling behind. It had never really figured that out. It had Bull, it had Alvieta, and it failed. The US won that race. Then it came around again with Wintelism, and we won that race. And this actually goes to David's, I don't know which book it was, David, Waves of Power, which was a book about these waves of computing. We won every wave. Europe didn't come close. And then we won the last wave, or the current wave, the sort of internet, Web 2.0, Google. And now we're going to win the next wave, which is AI. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And rather than go in and really do hard introspective thinking and saying what is wrong with the European system that we just can't do this. Now there's a couple of answers. Maybe it's just not Europe's competitive advantage. Europe's competitive advantage is really on things like chemicals, where Europe's great, and mechanical engineering, even electrical engineering. Europe is really good at that. And so maybe compute, software, electrical engineering in the computing sense, maybe Europe's just not that good. Okay. But Europe can't accept that. That's like, they can't accept that, which is, I think, completely irritating to me and to a lot of Americans, because Europe is running a $200 billion trade surplus with America. And they still go on and on and on about having to become digitally sovereign. Well, I want to be Mercedes sovereign. Yeah, no more Mercedes and BMWs in America. We need our own luxury cars. I mean, of course we don't say that. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is then this long tradition of European cautionary principle thinking. If a technology is going to be there, it's going to be a problem. I'll always remember I was at a thing called the Brussels Forum, a very nice event in Brussels, and it's mostly European policymakers and kind of European Davos. And they asked me to moderate a dinner. They sort of special focused dinners, and this dinner was on XR, VR. And so we're sitting there, and there's some goggles. We're going around the conversation. And the conversation, I was the only American in the room. And the conversation was basically, this technology sucks. Basically going to be guys watching porn all day, and kids are going to get addicted, and it's just going to be a rat hole. And I'm like, oh, this technology is great. Repair people can use it to repair things on the job. Kids can use it for education. And it was basically, at the end of the day, do you think the glass is half empty or the glass is half full? A lot of Europeans think the glass is half empty. I mean, you listen to the narrative over there, just one long rant against technology, and particularly American technology companies. So they figure, well, we can't make the technology companies. Why don't we just make really bad regulation that will limit American companies? And besides that, we'll sue them all the time in antitrust to take all their money. And then we'll export that regulation to other countries. So as you can tell, I don't think what they're doing is good, but in a more sort of generous way. I love Europe. I'm going over there in a week. I love going to Europe, and I love Europe as a country, as a region, 27 countries. And it really does disturb me that Europe is falling behind as much as they are. We did a study of comparing like 15 major indicators on AI. And the first year we did the study, about 6 years ago, it was US, Europe, China. We did it 2 years ago, it was US, China, Europe, in that order. And, if Europe wants to get out of this, it's just got to completely shift course. And it doesn't have to be, its image of Americans, which are these crazy cowboy capitalists who don't regulate anything. No, that's not who we are. But it does have to find some balance between what it's doing and a kind of more innovation focus.
So is there a country that you'd point to that has dispelled the myths, that is basing their policy on truths rather than some of these myths that you outlined? And that's a question for both of you.
Well, it's one of those things that's like, winning a beauty contest and an intelligence contest and a sports contest all in one. I don't know of a single person who can do that. I don't know of a single country that's got it all right. But there are a few that I think want to get it right and are close. I put Singapore in that category. They really seem like they're focused on getting this right. I think Taiwan is in there. I think Israel's doing a pretty good job when it comes to these kinds of questions. Most
I would throw the Nordic countries in as well.
The Nordics, to the extent they're not having to comply with the Brussels diktat.
Yeah.
Certainly not the Commonwealth nations. The Brits had a chance. They left the EU. They had this wonderful golden opportunity to do it right, and they have really largely, I don't want to say they've failed, but they really haven't taken advantage of that to do it the right way.
And we haven't talked about India, and they're certainly
don't get me started on India.
Throwing all their chips in on this area.
Yeah, but they still have India also is, if they could get over their nationalism, they might move forward.
Well, they also have more decentralization than a lot of people understand. So there are little pockets
Right.
of really intelligent innovation and entrepreneurship and policies that are working. But you're right. We are always saying that India is going to solve it all, but on e-government they're doing okay. But that's not the fundamental. The fundamental is getting innovation right and getting data policy right. I knew you weren't going to mention the Vatican because I saw that you quoted Pope Francis and his anti-AI screed. My last question is a little complicated.
I also quote an earlier Pope, though. I can't remember which one. It might have been Pope John, to point out how things have changed. Where I think it was Pope John 23rd. His comment was very pro-technology, and this was uplifting to humanity. And it's not that the technology has changed; it's the narrative around the world has changed.
Right. Well, I'm going to start turning to people in the audience and asking for questions here, or you can just write them in the chat and I'll happily read them. But in your introduction, you have this really quite astonishing history of techlash, going back to the 90s when all of us were enjoying the benefits of cyber optimism and maybe even cyber utopianism. People were really excited. It was easy to get support for new initiatives. It was easy to get support for taking and erasing some of the old regulations that were standing in the way. And then you list all of the different reasons why these myths are out there and why they're being propagated. And I won't list all of them, but they range from resentment over how successful the IT billionaires and the super hackers have been, the fact that people who aren't in the industry are looking for scapegoats as to why they're not as rich as the people in the industry, ideology from both the left and the right, where people assume the economy works a certain way and they find myths to support their vision. The fact that some people think things are just very simple, and that if a computer does a job that I used to do, then I'm out of a job, rather than understanding that if I learn AI, I can get a better job and I can tell the robots what to do. You talk about the hype cycle. We've all seen that. The fact that there's a whole lot of people who make a lot of money promulgating these myths and fighting for their positions. And then there's this apocalyptic dread, which has particularly infected the debate about AI. There is this sense that, oh, it's all going to come crashing down. And I'm of these different motivations and justifications and reasons. Is there one of these or two of these that are just never going to go away? And should we focus on and which one should we focus on most and really fight head on? Because I mean, we can't I mean, we don't want to waste time and effort on something that's the way it is.
Well, the biggest reason is one you didn't mention. It was the election of Donald Trump here and the Brexit referendum in Europe, that those dates in 2016 was when it all changed. Before then, tech was seen as really good. The CEOs of those companies were the rock stars of Davos and were on the covers of magazines. And all those criticisms and all the resentments and things we write about, and fears about privacy and all, they were all there, but they were not winning. They were always concerns that were out there, but they were a lesser view. But particularly when Trump won, it all flipped, because people said, whoa, he won because of his use of social media. He won because of misinformation and Russian bots. And he won because of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook targeting data. And people latched on to those deeply and convinced themselves that those were true and ignored, as Rob said earlier, all the many reasons that people voted for Trump that had nothing to do with that. And so that's when it all flipped. And since then, Trump's still on the scene and all of that. But what's really happened is that all of those critiques have taken on a life of their own, and they've all become conventional wisdom. And whether Trump wins or loses, they've now moved past that phase. But that's what unleashed it all.
Well, the funny part is that I knew exactly why Trump won, both the Republican primary and why he beat Hillary in 2016. For the entire year in 2016, I would get in line to buy my groceries, and the National Enquirer would have an article about Trump's opponents. And they were all fanciful, they were all crazy. But the National Enquirer is read by millions of people, and it was just full of these scandalous accusations like, Ted Cruz's father helped assassinate Kennedy. And that was out there. That wasn't the internet. That was just paper that everybody who walked through the grocery line saw. Rob, do you have any thoughts on core challenges, the places where we can really make a difference?
So I think David and I have slightly different emphasis here. I think I don't disagree with that Trump was essentially the spark that ignited the flame, but there had been a decade of gasoline being poured constantly. And one of the things I think people don't understand is the vast magnitude of money that is behind the anti-tech campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So just on existential risk of AI, sort of human extinction, we're talking $600 million over the last 4 years. So our budget, ITIF, we're not big, $5 million a year. And we have written about why existential risk is kind of just frankly stupid. Just stupid. And we're like a tsunami washing over us. There was a study we cite in the book, 200 left-leaning foundations now in America, massively funded, many of them by former tech CEOs who have, I guess, decided they want to, the problem with rich people, I've decided, is they think that the market and business takes care of itself. After all, look, I became rich. So then they're going to deal with, okay, well, here are all the problems that capitalism causes. I'm going to spend all my money funding those groups, oftentimes knowing that those groups are anti-capitalist and anti-corporate. But, you look at these groups, what do they stand for? Reject copyright, promote technology justice. Hey, look, what was that? What is technology justice? That is banning technology, that is limiting technology. Protecting privacy. What is that? That means nobody can ever use data for anything ever again. The GDPR on steroids. Banning new technologies like facial recognition. Breaking up large firms. I mean, if you're not in the middle of it, as I am, and Mike, you are too, it's so easy to not see this. Like, oh, well, these are just sort of like small grassroots groups. They're little, few coffee tables and mimeograph machines. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars a year focused against the technology industry and against technology. So the Ford Foundation alone, just one foundation has funded over 100 of these groups focused on, quote, public interest technology. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Oh, I want my technology to be public interest. But even the very term of public interest technology, what does it mean? It means that other technology is private interest. So your laptop, your phone, the websites, everything these companies are doing, all the WITSA members, they're only doing it for private interests. It's these good people, these sainted people who are doing it for the public interest. And again, I can't underestimate how big that is, how constant the drumbeat is. And worse on that is you then read what reporters say. Reporters who know better, who should know better, who constantly repeat this stuff. Like, I'll give you one example. NIST has a program every couple of years where you can submit your facial recognition algorithms and technology to have it be tested for, among other things, bias based on gender and skin color. And what they found the last time they did it was that the top 20% of the technologies that were submitted had zero statistical bias on the basis of race and gender. Every single article that was written about that said the vast majority of facial recognition technology is biased, and then they quoted these two African-American women at MIT who hate this technology, who, by the way, studied facial analysis technology, not facial recognition technology. Every single study, every single reporter reported it that way, rather than say, hey, the best companies, the companies who know what they're doing, have built technologies that have zero bias, and therefore, when governments are deploying this, they should have a rule that says, just like you have to use NIST cybersecurity standard, you have to use this, and you can't deploy bad facial recognition technology. So I don't think people understand. It's not like the media has an interest in telling that story. The media has an interest in telling the story. Facial recognition is biased against blacks. And that's what every story says, even though that's just not true.
I'm going to start taking questions, and we have a couple interesting observations in the chat, and I'll turn them into questions. Shajahan Iqbal, and I hope I came close to pronouncing that properly, writes, is technology and innovation focused on profit and capitalism and not on social and human goals for a better world? Or is there a balance? And I'll go a little further and say, is that another myth? Are social goods, social needs, and profit and corporate needs always in conflict, or is that a myth that we need to counter as well?
So we don't talk about human-centered plumbing. And I don't want those goddamn corporate rip-off plumbers. You know, we don't talk about, hey, this pencil, Dixon Ticonderoga, who the hell are they? Dixon, they're capitalists. They're ripping me off. I need pencil regulation. Why don't we do that? We don't do that for two big reasons. One is people buy things that satisfy their needs. And by and large, that generally works. And companies, whether they're making pencils, pipe, or computers or websites, generally want to be able to sell their stuff and not get hassled. And so generally, they sell things that people want. People want to use iPhones. It's not that Apple is evil in forcing you to use iPhones. People want to use Facebook. I mean, tonight it was my daughter's birthday, and we had a free telephone call, video by video, with my son is getting his PhD in computer science. Now you look at that and go, well, yeah, that's profit. Those evil, you know, Facebook never should have been allowed to acquire them. Wait a minute, Mike, you and I and David are older. You remember when you had to pay to do a long distance call and you did it after 11 p.m. because it cost so goddamn much? So no, I just don't buy into that. And the last part of that is there's two ways that societies intervene to say, when there is a problem, let's move things in that direction. Take automobile safety regulation. You know, the car companies would have been much slower to adopt things like, airbags and, the brake lights on the back and the higher up. Sure, no question, they would have been slower. That's why we have government. We say, do certain things. And then the second thing is you have advocacy groups, you have consumer reports, you have, and they'll point out things like that. So it's not to say that there's never anything wrong. I mean, we should have advocates saying, you know what, there's a company that, I don't know, you pick your company that had the data breach because they were too stupid to figure out you shouldn't use the router you reset the password on the router after you install it. yeah, those companies should be criticized and they should be taken to court, and we should have advocacies and media going after them. But that doesn't mean that all data stored on servers is going to be vulnerable, and we should shut that down. So
another myth that you don't explore explicitly is the idea that you can only do harm by not regulating enough. I don't think we have enough evidence that you can do a lot of harm by regulating too much. I mean, all the focus is on, oh my God, this is unregulated. Let's go and put together some regulation. But we don't hear calculations of how many hours of our lives will be wasted clicking on cookie buttons to say we accept these cookies when there are so many better ways to do it. It's just that the people in Brussels decided that they would have a law that required you to know that a cookie was being collected rather than having a more intelligent browser that could figure that out for itself.
So Mike, I'll answer that question for you here. $2.3 billion a year. We did the analysis, and that was the cost of the EU cookie policy. Think about if you'd taken that instead and put a tenth of it into preschool education or childhood vaccines.
Or invested in NVIDIA.
Or built in NVIDIA. Yeah.
Okay, even better. Mr. Iqbal had another question, which I thought was also right to the heart of what we're talking about. He writes, is there too much hype and high-profile advertising and prestige focused on the unicorns? I mean, is the hype cycle that is fed by these companies who want to convince the world that they have the world-changing technology, is that having a perverse incentive? Is it causing politicians to say, oh my God, this is the hottest, coolest thing, it's going to change the world? I know because this startup that has 30 employees has told me so. Or is it worse than that? Is it that these startups are promising they can do magic, and so the politicians say, okay, well, do some magic. Here's my 5 demands. You have great technology. You have great technologists. Figure out a way to do all these things that I want you to do. I mean, is hype just out of control? And is there anything to be done about that?
Yeah, I take the opposite view. It's the unicorns and the hype and the change that drives the whole bus. It is the essence of what allows technology to advance. That, you know, Microsoft ran circles around IBM, and then Google and Apple ran circles around Microsoft in phones, and now NVIDIA's running circles around Intel and all the old chip makers. And it's been the whole game since the 60s that, you know, new generations of companies replace old ones. And the countries that haven't done that, and I spent a lot of time on Japan, you know, those same companies, Fujitsu, Hitachi, Toshiba, NEC, Matsushita, they couldn't do it. They couldn't keep up with the generational change, and they just lost and lost and lost. And that's the one big difference that China has gotten right, that they have adopted to that.
But did the Japanese lose because they didn't have enough hype, or did they lose because they didn't have enough openness,
They absolutely,
innovation?
the openness, seniority, and absolutely lack of hype. That the whole thing was, no, Fujitsu will figure this out. We don't need a new company to go do that.
Yeah, and we don't need to partner with other people.
Yeah,
Just
we know how to
we can do it
that.
ourselves. Yeah.
And they got crushed.
The other thing, though, to the person's question is, look, I can tell you that Technology, Fears and Scapegoats is, I would say, probably the greatest book since the Bible, if not greater.
I was gonna make the same comparison, Rob.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my closing remark.
Exactly. Now I can say that because I am not an investor in this company. I mean, I'm sure I'll get a few royalties of like $7 a year, which I get from my other books. But you take a unicorn, somebody has put an enormous amount of money in there, not because they're idiots, because they honestly are betting their money that they think this is going to change the world. Now, a lot of them don't work, but on net, they have to work because otherwise people wouldn't be putting their money in there. So I think we have to remember that, you know, when you start a company like that, you're taking such an enormous risk with your life, with all this other stuff, with your employees. So, you know, if we don't have that, what you know, what's called the irrational exuberance, we're just going to get less of those. And I'd love to have 1,000 unicorns, not 100. And sure, there's some hype. I mean, that's the other thing. You know, I was thinking about, you know, I remember back in the .com era when and the wireless boom and all that. And a guy came by my company, guy's company came by and talked to me. And said, I got this great technology. It's going to do microwave backhaul in urban areas, metropolitan areas. I thought to myself, this is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Like, why would anybody do that? You'd want to run it on your fiber poking ring or whatever. And you know, they got a couple $100 million, and then they went bankrupt a year later. Okay, so that was a stupid idea, but you know, markets try these things and they fail, and that's how you test things. But at the end of the day, the things that do succeed are more than worth it by far than the losses that we have.
So I'm going to let Anders and Dan and Robert and any of the others on the line ask the questions. You can either get recognized and ask them with your own voice or type them out. I see we've got something from Anders. Do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I mean, this is just another pointed question. We had a part of this session talking about the Brussels effect and the glass half empty versus half full. Just you know, following up on that closely related to that discussion. One of the things we hear a lot, we hear it certainly over in Europe, we hear it all around the world, we hear it on Congress by certain policymakers. You know, this is thing that AI is so important that you got to get ahead of the technology. So basically, can we debunk this, that proactive and forward-thinking policymaking can anticipate tech trends and create frameworks that guide responsible innovation? In other words, rule makers need to get ahead of the technology so that it doesn't get out of hand. I think it's a little different angle on what we discussed earlier.
I think that's a great idea. I think that Europe should pass the AI Act before ChatGPT came on the market. That's a great idea. Like, who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
Look, the reality is, the reason people say this, and the example every single person gives, is now that we know how bad the internet is and social media, now that we know that it elected Trump, if Mike Nelson, who'd worked on that back in the Clinton, if you just hadn't been so libertarian, you would have put in the right rules to have prevented this from happening today. When somebody says that, ask them, what specific rules would you have put in place? Because the answer is, you couldn't have put in place any different rules. If you'd put in place a rule that wasn't Section 230 in the US, you wouldn't have gotten the internet the way we know it today. So, yeah, I suppose you could say we could have killed the internet. That would have solved the problem.
Minitel from
Minitel.
France. Total Control,
Exactly.
France Telecom.
Exactly. And you could say the same thing about AI today. My colleague Hadan Omar just released a fantastic report today, and it's called Picking the Right Policy Solutions for AI Concerns. And it lists 34 different policy concerns that we have identified around the world, that policymakers have identified. And it goes through each single one. It says, okay, is this an AI issue? Like privacy. Privacy is not an AI issue. Privacy is a privacy issue. Deep fakes. All right, that's an AI issue. But can a national government regulate deep fakes? No. So anyway, the point of all that is we're so far early on in this process that the risk of doing something regulatory now, the risk of serious harm is way higher in my view than the risk of not doing something now. Now, at some point, sure, we can think about what rules, but even there, I would argue, by and large, I would not regulate AI at all. I just wouldn't. I would regulate applications where AI is
Yeah.
being used. We don't have spreadsheet regulation.
And
But, you know,
spreadsheets have done a lot more damage than AI, and
oh,
will
think
for
about
at
that.
least the next 5 years.
Exactly. No, we have rules on fair credit reporting and banking, so that you can't, you know, you can't make loans on the basis of race. And it doesn't matter whether you use a spreadsheet or a pencil. The same rules should apply to AI decision making there. So I just think we all ought to slow down and take a deep breath. Most of the AI issues that we're concerned about are easily solved in the kind of current buckets of things that we already regulate on.
I've got an article that's about to come out. It's just a very short essay on 7 AI myths. And the first one is, it's a myth that the term artificial intelligence is useful for anything other than marketing. You certainly shouldn't put it in legislation and try to define what is inside the AI box and needs to be regulated and what can't. And none of the legislation that's out there has any kind of workable definition. We have 2 minutes left. David, I'm going to leave it to you to cover all the things we didn't cover, and we'll go from there.
Wow. Well, I go back to the title of the book. We talk about technology, fears, and scapegoats as the sort of dominant mindset of today's times. And, you know, 10 years ago, no, you wouldn't have written a book like that. You would have called it, I don't know, technology dreams and possibilities, or
fantasies and
visions,
science
or,
fiction,
you know, goals, and you know, and so we've seen this quite severe shift from optimism to pessimism, and that's permeated America and certainly Europe, but it hasn't permeated China and India. And if they're playing with one set of thinking and we're playing with another, it's not such a good idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you for leaving us on a very sour note. But but the fact is, the US in the 60s was even more optimistic than the Chinese. We had the Jetsons inspiring kids like me, and Tom Swift. And so maybe we just need to unleash our science fiction writers, our comic book writers, our cartoon makers, and change the mindset. I will leave with one reference. If you haven't discovered the Vlog brothers, VLOG brothers, Hank and John Green are incredibly successful writers of young adult fiction. But more importantly, they've built a community of millions of American teenagers excited about being nerds and excited about spreading science to all their friends. And it's an underground movement. Maybe it will change, you know, a few kids each day, and unleash the next generation of innovators. Well, thank you both. This has been even more interesting and useful than I thought it would be. It's great to work with both of you again. And Anders and Dan and Robert, thank you for everything you do at WITSA and for making this opportunity possible.
Thank you as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, David, and Mike. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
And keep those bumper stickers coming.
Got it.